I'm gonna leave it up to y'all.
Well, y'all haven't done that.
I would, but
I'm trying to place, but I ain't even done it until y'all do.
Well, let me tell you, we're gonna go ahead and get started, and the first thing I'm gonna do is recognize the elephant in the room, which I said I wasn't gonna do, but I just think, it's so obvious that we do have an elephant at the end of the room, the camera. And our intention by sort of making the editorial board meeting accessible to the public is to be as transparent as we can possibly be and allow people to look in on what we do. So I hope, to be honest with you, we can just kind of ignore the thing. And it'll be there, and if folks want to sit in on what we do when we get together and we have these talks, that's great. And hopefully it will help people kind of not just see behind the scenes, but get an appreciation for how valuable this group is to us and how you help us sort of shape opinion and policy for the newspaper. And the other thing I want to do, sort of a little bit out of the ordinary for today, is also tell you that it's been a very, very difficult week at Valdosta Daily Times. We lost one of our own, and Vince Cribb was extremely well known in the community. Just one of those guys that could do absolutely anything with his hands. A really smart man that was the salt of the earth, would do anything for anybody. And for us to lose him in a very tragic accident at his home is a very sad, somber thing for the Times, but also for the community, and more so for his close family and friends, that our hearts just go out to him. So that's we've been dealing with that this week, and we will continue to think about his family and see to the things that are just surrounding that. So it has been a difficult day even to be at work, and Dean and I were talking, gosh, I guess it was on Monday, we found out. You just kind of feel numb for a little while when something as unexpected as that happens. I mean, we all lose people, you know, in our sphere, but usually not quite so just tragic and unexpected as that. So it's a very difficult thing for us to be dealing with. Okay, so we are sort of chipping away at what we told you we were going to do, and that is to lift the veil on the newspaper and to give people sort of an inside view to hopefully help build trust in news, and also just make ourselves much more accessible to the community. And we've got some really great feedback. One of the parts of that we told you about last time that we met was that we were going to start an online video editorial series. And I promise you, I'm not going to make you sit through this whole thing, but I'm going to show you just a couple of minutes of one of these in case you haven't seen it yet. And obviously we can, get your feedback and talk about it some. And some part of this is self-serving, because one of the things we did was talk about this group.
And we are editors of the Valdosta Daily Times, and we want to talk a little bit about what we do. And one of the most important things that we do in our work is write editorials. We believe that the newspaper ought to be a marketplace of ideas. We believe that we ought to do our best to be very reflective of the community that we're serving, in this case, Valdosta and Lowndes County. And this week, something's caught our attention. There was a sort of a 2-hour meeting, for want of a better term, between city and county officials to talk about service delivery strategy agreements, which is this sort of 10-year mandate that cities and counties have across the state of Georgia, that they have to decide how services are going to be delivered to the public in a cost-effective way without doing any kind of duplication of services and avoiding any kind of double taxation. The thing is like every county and the cities in those counties have got to do this every 10 years, and they all do.
Well, they do. And every 10 years, it seems our last one in this county has a major problem. Very well in some respects, in a lot of ways, but when it comes to necessity, a lot of trouble.
Right. So I think sometimes people wonder, like, where do newspaper editorials come from? And how do we determine positions? And who writes those editorials? Well, to answer the last question first, we write those editorials. So, and it's really, I think it's safe to say pretty much a collaborative kind of process. We work on those together. We wordsmith them together. We sort of idea generate together. But the greatest resource that we have is an editorial board. And we meet with that editorial board a couple of times a month at least, right? And we talk about the things that are going on in our community. We talk about positions, and we're not always agreement.
No, there's not always agreement, but a very diverse and cool, a lot of folks on it. Sometimes they're all there, sometimes a few of them are out, and it's a very good candid conversation. And we show them that on Facebook Live stories.
Yeah.
All right, that's enough of that.
So it's one more meeting where-
We push pause on this.
Video within a video.
Yeah, it's a play within a play kind of thing, right?
Back in time. Yeah.
So, I don't know if y'all had a chance to view it or not. I guess I should do this too, so you know that these are available on the website and you can find them in a couple of different places. So if you go to the multimedia or video section of the website, you can find them there, but also just by selecting the opinion tab on the main page, and I'll take you back there, you can get all of the editorials and all the personal columns, the letters to the editor, the guest columns, and you'll find these video editorials saved there as well. So we try to build this repository on the website where things just make sense, like they do sections in a newspaper.
Pardon me, this is not behind the paywall then, this is just, we can access it directly?
Well, everything on the site, well, I'll say everything, most things on the site, most of the content is metered, and this is metered as well.
That means I need
But
to
I'm logged in,
log.
Yeah,
password.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah, you have to log in.
I have a problem, which I have it on my desktop, I don't have it on my phone, so I gotta get it on everything,
Right.
so I just not have to think about it.
Jim,
So as you're scrolling down the site, about 3/4 of the way down, you'll see all of these tabs. This is our Georgia, Florida News Collaborative News Project. We always collect stories and editorials and columns on open government here and throughout the state of Georgia. And this is the opinion section where you'll find all the editorials and personal columns, and also those video editorials. And our cycle, we talked about, we're going to do at least one video a week.
Yeah, maybe one this afternoon.
Yep.
And then plan, possibly, maybe.
just a question, and it's not, I don't have an opinion either way. But, so you're saying on those videos, you have to log in, actually have to have a subscription to look at them? Okay, I'm just clear.
Yeah.
But for the record, I'm assuming that this is gonna be put, at some point put online. But for the record, that if you have a newspaper subscription, you have a subscription to the online stuff, correct?
Right.
Okay.
Now, there's I hate using the word strategy because that almost sounds nefarious, but there's a strategy that, say, The Guardian, the New York Times, the Washington Post, and other great news organizations have employed in the last year or so, where they are building their audience and building their subscription base and shifting their revenue model by asking readers not just to subscribe, but to support journalism. And so one of the ways you can support journalism is by obviously buying a subscription, and almost all of our readers are what we call all access. You pay one price, you get it all. And, there are people out there that may not be thinking of themselves as a traditional subscriber, but local journalism is really important to them. That local government's being held accountable, that there's some accountability type journalism that goes on a consistent basis, that they want to read enterprise or investigative reports, and they might support journalism just for those reasons. So I think
Kind
it's
of like you
interesting
join the
thing.
Sierra Club or something, you're just
Yeah.
basically saying, hey, I believe in the work these people do.
Yeah, I think that's a perfect example. So you might send that donation or subscription to Sierra Club, and you get their periodicals and everything. but you may never really be that active in the Sierra Club, but you believe in the cause. So we believe, I think, that there are people out there that still very much value local journalism. And we don't want people to, and I'm not saying this in any way to bash national media, but we don't want people to conflate what we do with what they do. You know, what we do is cover our community better than anybody. What we do is editorialize about local things that are going on in our community, or that affect our community. So, and honestly, I think, you know, we talked about this some last week, but you talked very candidly about how there are state issues that are still local because they affect us. And so we're trying to editorialize more just because of that conversation that we had in the editorial board meeting about the need to opine on those things. And then we also launched Dome Light, which is a column that comes out every Saturday's edition where we just write on a state issue. And so just as, you know, a little preview, Dome Light this Saturday is going to deal with, there's several different measures, and it's kind of piecemeal when you look at like all the bills that have been filed that deal with elections. Instead of one sort of comprehensive election overhaul measure, there's one that gives like small communities fewer days that they're required to hold early voting, right? There's a measure that specifically calls out what pieces of ID will be accepted at polling places. So there's several of those little piecemeal kind of things. And then there's also potential funding in the budget for new voting machines. And so I'm gonna write about all of those.
That's a big chunk of money this year.
Yeah.
Everyone's got to buy new ones. And just anecdotally in Brooks County, they recently purchased, I don't know, half dozen or a dozen machines. It's a big investment. And then they're informed that they're now obsolete, you know, so that,
You don't know what the price tag was on those, do you?
I don't, but I can get it. I mean,
Yeah, that would be interesting context of this.
I'm on a first name basis with the head of the elections out there. He's a good guy.
Is that Ken?
Ken moved.
Yeah, he
Did he?
moved,
I didn't
yeah.
realize that.
I saw that, I
His
saw him last
successor,
week, he told me.
Mr. Charles Davis.
Okay.
Local guy, and worked his way up, took over the function.
But Ken, I think, became a board of, he's running isn't he running a board election somewhere else, I think.
Who, Ken?
Ken Combs,
I don't know.
I think he told me he was.
Okay.
And it might be, I got his number, but
Right.
I don't know
I'll
exactly.
have to check it out. I haven't seen
You
it.
know,
in a while.
It's been some time on this group since we talked about exact match. And
The signature?
yeah, it's not just the signature. It's and there's examples that Dean and I used when we wrote about this in the past. I'd love to kind of get current thinking on it. But when I went to vote, in the interest of total transparency, my social security card has one name. My driver's license has another name. And my voter registration card has another name. So I am Jim Zachary, I am Jimmy Zachary, and I am James L. Zachary. And I'm all the same guy.
Right.
Now, exact match could have been used to make my ballot provisional,
Mm-hmm.
right? Didn't necessarily mean I don't get to vote, but it could
It's
call
put
it
in that
that.
pile. Yeah.
But nobody questioned me at the polls. Nobody stopped me. But many people across Georgia were questioned at the polls. So maybe I'm wrong, but I think it's not lost on me the fact that I am a middle-aged white male. And I did not exact match at all. So anyway, I'd like to get some current thinking because that may be.
I don't know if this is true. I don't know if it's true for Georgia or not, but, you know, I got friends down with, to this day, I still do, with the Florida Department of Law Enforcement. And that came up when I was down there a couple of years ago, helping them with something. And got on the subject of Florida and all their tobacco they've had too. One of the problems Florida's having, and I don't know if Georgia's having the same one, I don't know how this could be a problem, but it is. It's apparently the same standards, like you're talking about exact match, doesn't seem to be filtered down to every election office.
Right.
And it's subjective. And so one election office may, and I'm not saying that there's not anything foul going on,
Right.
but that appears to be the problem. At least that's what I was told by FDLE, who was, played a little bit of a part in the 2000 election, looking at that too. But I think that's a major problem, is they're not following, the standards are not being filtered down all the way down to the bottom, I think.
So you think it goes way beyond what the legislation does or doesn't say? It's the messaging that back.
Well, sure, I mean, it's like any other big organization.
The enforcement or execution of whatever's in the law or regulation
Yeah.
is not necessarily uniform.
Right.
I mean, Jim,
Depends on the local board of elections.
That's right.
you want another example of that? Look at asset forfeitures. Heck, it's all over the place.
Yeah.
It really, to seize funding or money and property from folks in this state, and this I know for a fact, and this has not changed. I was talking to a friend of mine a couple weeks ago, he's still doing it. And it's all over the place, but it really boils down to that district attorney's office.
All right.
It really is, at the end of the day, I know what the standards are, but it boils down to the DA and the relationship they have with the judge. And I'm not saying anything foul about that,
Right.
but that's why I think asset forfeiture will go away.
Yeah.
It is not reaching down to the lower level.
Well, I think there's a lot to be said about the lack of uniformity in elections. I still know that just that one piece of exact match legislation that was passed after the court said you can't require exact match. Then the General Assembly said, watch us, and passed a piece of legislation around it. And that's now the centerpiece of several lawsuits, transparently, that have been filed by Stacey Abrams, which, you wonder about the timing around that, right? You lose the election and you file lawsuits about open and free elections. But regardless of all of that, it does seem like that piece of legislation in Georgia, and it's one of the few states that have that, is at the very least going to cast a cloud over elections as long as we have that.
I'd like
specific.
to ask a question, especially with your law enforcement background. And this issue keeps coming back like a pendulum every 10 years. National ID card. Why is the United States the only sort of developed country I'm aware of that doesn't have a national ID card? It would solve so many problems. I lived overseas. I lived in Western Europe for 20 years. It's unthinkable over there that you would board an airplane simply by showing a driver's license. You gotta be kidding. Where's your ID? It's totally normal. This is the only country where you don't have.
I agree. I agree.
And it
with
would make issues like voter fraud and border enforcement and workplace enforcement and welfare fraud and tax fraud all easier to deal with if one could simply ask a person, please show me proof of citizenship or identity.
But I think what the federal government's
going
gonna say is, federal government's gonna say that's a state issue, not a federal government issue.
What
That's they're gonna
what
say.
is identification?
I guarantee you.
Well, why would they do that?
Well,
Because
you-
they're perfectly happy to say that
And listen, I agree.
enforcement's federal.
I agree with you, but what's gonna happen is, I can get a Georgia ID card.
Hmm.
I don't have to have a driver's license.
All right.
For voting purposes.
Right,
For
they're
the-
gonna
yeah,
say,
sure.
they're gonna say that's a state issue. That's fact.
Well,
But imagine if we're
I'll tell you
If we're having trouble with voter enforcement or voter laws, like you're saying, in a state by state, imagine the mess we'd be in if identification were left to the states.
well,
Because then you'd have New Hampshire have one procedure and Colorado have another.
I'm not going to disagree with you about the value of it, but I guarantee double T what it does is it creates another huge bureaucracy that we're going to pay for because.
What, to run the administration?
Oh my gosh,
IDs?
there'll be an administrator and there'll be a deputy to the administrator
Well, of
and there'll be
course.
deputies to the deputies and
We could,
Build
we
a-
could
build out a
fire, we could
huge
fire
bureaucracy.
half the IRS. We have to take care of it. I was shocked, by the way, when they had the government shutdown, when I learned that there were 700,000 Treasury employees. What the hell are these people doing?
wow,
700,000.
wow.
If I may, I just want to throw in another
Yeah,
thing.
yeah,
When you were
yeah,
talking
yeah.
about with the legislation,
Right,
and you were saying instead of trying to comprehensively fix everything in one bill, that there were several bills attacking discrete issues.
Right.
And I think that's another pendulum swinger there too, that there's fashions, legislators sometimes will say, we should try to fix everything in one bill. They're like, yes. And then they realize if they try to do that, they never fix anything.
Yeah.
Because they're always arguing over the totality, and simple discrete issues, which everyone could agree on, don't get fixed because they're held waiting until the
Well,
comprehensive.
and you probably know a lot about this, because of your involvement, but that bill to reduce the number of days of early voting in small communities bubbled up as a piece of local legislation, right? It wasn't that somebody in Atlanta said, oh, it's a big burden on these small towns and
Right.
nobody turns out. It bubbled up from the community saying, I don't have the funds to staff early voting for 2 weeks, right? So
Especially
that's
when
what-
you got primary, special primary, general, municipal, all in the same tax
And
year.
now a runoff in the House one
Right,
seventy-six.
and then a
There's gonna be
runoff. There you
Which
go.
will have an early voting period, probably starting a week from now.
What a great transition, Mr. Foley. So we wrote editorials encouraging people to vote in House Race 176, and a whopping 11%
Yeah.
turned out to vote.
Wow.
And about 300 people in the portion of Lowndes during the 3 weeks of early voting.
How many?
About 300 during a
My
three-week period.
So in the district, 3,500 people voted, am I right, Dean?
Yeah.
Right around 3,500 out of more than 30,000
Portions of
registered
four
voters.
Yeah.
So that's four counties that have to run the election machinery?
Right.
For only
that one-
portions, yeah,
Wow.
because
Yeah,
that's only a
it's a
portion of
sliver,
Lowndes, a
right.
portion of Atkinson, a portion of where it's quite a bit of linear.
Hmm.
But yeah, four counties like on
Right.
for it once again.
And this is in no way a cloud over Franklin Patton and John Burkett, but 11% of the electorate is gonna pick one of them to be their next state representative. Just speaks a
I
lot.
mean,
So I think people feel like we beat that voter turnout drum way too much. I don't think we beat it enough.
Yeah, I thought that was very appropriate to call issue a reminder to people, hey,
Let me give you another example, by the way, and I'll stop, get off this subject. Let me give you another example why I think it's proof that the Georgia has the same problem as Florida about what to do. The information's not getting back down these offices. Then what to do if you have a problem. During my tenure as chief, I absolutely, with the GBI, we looked at a allegation of
Angels, George.
okay, we looked at an allegation of voter or someone running for a particular office,
Right.
was qualified. Now, I can tell you for a fact that didn't have a brain surgeon to figure out there was a clear violation here. But when you take it back to the Board of Election and you take it back to the GBI, and you take it back to the district attorney, they're not sure what to do with it.
Right.
That's the truth. That's the fact. So I remember when that happened, I'm sitting there thinking, well, Christ, we're not too different than Florida. Florida has the same problem. I think it's the same thing that's the same thing you're talking about with the identification of a voter, validation of a voter. I think the problem is there might be standards. I don't think they are, but if there are standards, it's not getting down to those offices.
Right.
Just not. It's subjective. And then I'm not knocking Deb Cox. She's a friend of mine. I like her. Okay. But that's not getting down, and that's not being enforced consistently across these states.
well, but I can just tell you anecdotally, my experience qualifying candidates, which is the thing I do as a party officer, and that's before the election, right? That's a very bureaucratic process with a complex series of forms and affidavits and stamps and there's a learning curve, and you do it every couple of years, so you never really learn how to do it. And it's the blind leading the blind. The candidates don't know how to do it. The party officials don't know how to do it. The employees in the election office don't know how to do it. And it's for the mechanism to work properly, it requires some competence, but a lot of good faith. It requires that people work together. For example, in the past cycle, the Democrat forgot to file something or post it in the courthouse before a certain deadline. Well, I went, posted my thing up there before the deadline, and I went ahead and called my election supervisor, Mr. Dave, and I said, Mr. Dave, it's Arthur here, I'm over at the courthouse. The Democrats haven't posted their thing yet. You better call them to remind them. And it was past the deadline. I didn't bitch and moan and complain and sue, right? I could have, or I could have been mean and not told them, and then the Democrats would have forgotten, and all their candidates would be ineligible to run this year. I could have done that, but I didn't. That's what I mean by good faith, because we're all conscious of the fact that it's a complex mechanism. I can't say that my opposing party had similar good faith when I omitted one name out of 18 on a list 8 years ago, and they practically tried to make a federal case out of it and expel the head of the elections office for having let us squeak by. So this is just a long expose to show that the machinery for running these elections is very complicated.
Right.
And it's subject, it could be subject to a heck of a lot more scrutiny, but I'm not sure that would help. Because then you would find that a very high percentage of all our elections are not conducted according to the regulations.
Well, and I think that's where Brian's made a really, really compelling case for uniformity in processes, procedures, and enforcement. And I think and that's a great place for us to sort of opine from, is the fact that there's not consistency.
Well, that's a result, in my opinion.
Mhm.
That's a result of that lack of uniformity.
Right.
Now, look, don't get me wrong. I don't think you can write a procedure for everything, even with the Valdosta Day Times. There's going to be some subjectivity to it. You have to have it. There's no way around it.
But even the forms are poorly designed.
Well, I know.
I have a law degree, an MBA, a college degree, and people come up to me and go, what does this mean? I go, I don't know.
Hey, you ready?
I don't check the
Let me
things.
get on a small level. My son's deployed to Afghanistan. He's got a truck. I'm not paying insurance on his truck while he's there when it's just sitting there parked, right?
Mhm.
Started my insurance company, no problem. Well, I called Atlanta because I didn't want him to get on my case and, suspend my license or something. They told me one thing. Then they said, go see your tag office. They told me another. I'm like, well, which one do I do? They didn't know.
Right.
I'm not knocking anybody. I'm just saying that message is not, it should, that's a state issue. It should start and it should filter down, and that should be a simple answer. But it's just, I think you're right. We're saying the same thing. And by the way, I do want to make a point before I forget about it. You mentioned it, and I'm just giving my opinion. I think what you and Dean did with that video, that's not self-serving at all. That's teaching people. I'm not saying you should have empathy for anybody.
Right.
But I think, I go back to 2008, I told you about that. You walk in and you find out how a news organization works, then you understand why they do what they do. I think that's dead on correct.
Well, and our tactic is to kind of give people a little bit of like what our thought processes were as we're sitting down and writing these things and why we're writing about it to begin with. That particular one that we didn't show the whole thing, we wrote about service delivery strategy, which honestly, I think anybody in this community, when they look at that SDS, thinks that it's a debacle. Now, it's great that now it looks like they're moving forward.
Yeah, trying
Right? But I think everybody wants to
Okay, man, and look,
see that thing agreed to.
and
and move on.
look, I'm gonna just tell you, I said this the last time I was here too. The feedback I'm getting, and I don't get as much as I used to, is, people are going to, I think folks are becoming disenfranchised with national media. With the partisan, the signs they're taking, if you want to look at it that way. I'm looking at local media, local TV station, local newspapers. I'm not looking at that stuff. As for service delivery, you have to be, I was part of that.
Yeah,
You have to be blind not to realize there's a problem here.
right. Well,
So-
especially when every other county seems to do it. So they get, all right, we'll switch pages again. If you read today's editorial, this case, I believe, is a landmark case in Georgia
Well, the
because,
sunlight laws?
Yeah.
Sunshine laws?
right, so the Georgia Bureau of Investigation turned over, its probe into open records violations by the city of Atlanta and the former press secretary of Kasim Reed. And there are criminal findings. It is the first time in Georgia this has happened. We've always had teeth written into our sunshine law, at least since 2012. We're one of the few states where there are actually significant fines that people can have to pay, and they can be cited with a misdemeanor. But those teeth really haven't chopped down very much. And so now, here's somebody that didn't even deny public records. They just stalled it. And it was kind of interesting the way that the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, WSB, were able to sort of get to the bottom of all of this, but they actually made records requests for the text between this press secretary and a public information officer, and they were texting back and forth, make it as hard as possible, drag it out as long as you can, and frustrating the public's access to what should be theirs. And I hope that records custodians, county commissioners, Board of Education, central office, city office, county offices are all paying really, really close attention, because now the state has said, Chris Carr has said in the AG's office, that we're going to take this really, really seriously. And we're not just going to have sort of these token sunshine laws out there. So I know that's another drum that we beat a lot, but honestly, that's a lot of what we believe and who we are as a newspaper, and that is transparency and public access, the public right to know. And that is a kind of an Atlanta story on our front page, but it's an Atlanta story with real local implications, not just here, but in every community across the state of Georgia. So that's why we wrote the editorial. That's why that became a front page piece, because that applies to everybody everywhere in local government. So I wanted to get y'all's sort of thoughts. I mean, all this is bubbled up instantly. We didn't know when the investigation was coming back. We didn't have the opportunity to meet the editorial board prior to this. We would have shared the information with you had we known it was coming, but I think most people thought this investigation was just going to go on until it was forgotten about, but it didn't in this case. So y'all have any?
So have formal charges of an indictment?
Yeah. There are 2 citations, which are misdemeanor charges.
Okay.
And the fine can be $1,000, up to $1,000 for the first violation, and then up to $2,500 for each subsequent violation in a 12-month period. So it could get really pricey for violating the open records and open meetings law.
And do they have to pay it out of their own money or the government's money?
They are supposed to, if the charges are filed against that person, they are supposed to be the person.
They're
that is culpable. Right.
Well, at this point, they're forward. They're not even still employed with the city.
Okay.
Right. But there have been a few cases where the AG's office, without a criminal investigation, has sent memorandums of understanding to local jurisdictions, to city councils, in our case, to the hospital authority about us in Lowndes County, and had them sign an MOU which required them to pay a fine.
Has there ever been an instance in Georgia of a court ordering a bureaucrat to release, to comply with a
Yeah. But
injunctive
the
relief?
court, what happens is the attorney general has a mediation program where they will tell local officials, you're out of compliance, you need to comply.
Yeah.
And then at times they go the next step, which are these MOUs. But Chris Carr took what we think y'all know I'm really involved in the Georgia First Amendment Foundation, Vice President, I do their training. We think that this has been a long time coming. But Chris Carr followed up on some great open government work that was done in the state by Sam Owens, but Chris Carr took it to the next level and said, not only are we going to mediate this, we believe this act was criminal. And so he ordered the GBI to launch an investigation. And they did their due diligence and came back with real findings.
And I think the thing people forget too is, when Jim mentioned that it affects every public official in the state, it affects every person in the state. And I think too often people read this and I think it's a media, newspaper, television, news type of issue, but it's really it's a fundamental right of a citizen to go and be able to get the documents from the government that represents them. I mean, it's as Jim often writes, the laws are really for the governed, not the governing. So.
I was shocked when I came back to the United States in 2010. I got involved in a thing in Brooks County where we filed an open records request regarding an environmental thing, a parcel of land, and they wanted to develop it. The county did, and we wanted the records showing what kind of environmental audit or impact study or whatever. And so I lived through the process of actually, as you say, as a citizen,
Right.
not as a journalist, asking for. So they stonewalled, and then they claimed they didn't have a proper photocopying machine that could photocopy, et cetera. But I was shocked that these laws existed. In Europe, you don't have any rights like that. You can't ask the government to give you documents. So
Well,
it's a very special right that we
Right.
have.
Right. And I will tell you from my perspective, I'm almost aghast that these laws are needed. Right? So should you have to have a law to tell government in an open for free society to be open? You have to have a law to tell people to give people the records that already belongs to them. You have to have a law to tell people that they have to conduct the public's business out in the open. I mean, it's crazy. But not just the media, but the media and the public often have to leverage those laws and cite state law in order to get records,
Sure.
which
To
is
the
kind of
lawmakers
crazy,
and-
right?
And the law enforcement quite often that happens.
You know,
So,
it's the same thing. I'm telling you right now, that open record stuff that I am convinced. I know you go around and I appreciate what you've done, and I've done it too. Not as much as you have, but I am shocked at how many, I'll just say it, police chiefs, council members, commissioners, mayors, and so on, don't understand this law.
Yeah.
And you know, I'll tell you something else too. You know, this happened probably not even a month ago. And I've been retired since September. I had a chief call me and said, Brian, how long can I stand behind, and
that's the open investigation.
did, typical thing. I'm sure you hear that stuff too. I said, well, is it open? I said, well, if we said something, no. And work that way, does Jim. I said, are you actually doing anything with that case that was considered an active case? I said, when was the last time you did anything fundamentally active to that case? What's been a year? That ain't an open case. That ain't an active case. You'll get in trouble.
Right.
But I'm just telling you that what's shocking, you're right. What's shocking is anytime the media asks for something, look, I'd be guilty of this too. I'm not saying I'm perfect because I admit it. Media asks for something. First thing you want to add, first thing you want to look at when you're the government is, okay, do we have to release this?
Right.
And it
Which
should
is
be
the
that.
exact opposite way.
That's right.
Right.
Should be that way.
So, couple of exciting things I can tell y'all about that are sort of in the works, and that is, so government has largely trained government on open meetings and open records. And this is going to sound like horrible, but I'm not going to make any apologies. It's kind of like putting the fox in charge of the hen house. Because if you look at most of the training for government officials, it's about exactly what Brian just said, and he knows firsthand because he was right there in the middle of it, is how not to run afoul of the law, which I think is an odd kind of way to teach transparency. Like, I didn't raise my son, and I'm sure y'all didn't raise your children, for those of you that have them,
How do not get caught?
how not to get caught, right? that was, you taught them to be good people. You didn't teach them how not to get caught doing things. So, but I feel like that's the way that the training has happened. So, within the past few weeks, the Georgia First Amendment Foundation has been working with state and local governments, the AG's office, with the county commissioners group in the state, with county clerks groups in the state, for us to provide independent, third-party, open government training. We've made great inroads, and I think it's going to be significant. The other thing that's happening is in a few weeks, I'm on a task force that is doing a rewrite of what we call the Red Book. And I call it a rewrite, and it's really not. It's a revising and an updating because the law is still the law. The law was revised and ratified in April of 2012. We've had a few tweaks between here and there, but there's not been another major revision. But there have been some changes. And also, we kind of felt like in some cases this one was a little bit hard to read because of the smallness of the print. But we're working on that, and I'm going to be locked in a room in a few weeks, and we're going to get this thing back out into the public. And these are free.
Is this for citizens to know how to do,
You
how to
can,
find
Yeah.
an effective sunshine law?
We call it a citizen's guide to open government, but I'm gonna tell you, I give more of these out to elected officials than just about.
I'll make a suggestion, you may already be doing it. When you do, done with that, make sure it translates over to the Blue Book,
Right,
which is the law enforcement. book.
and I think we're gonna try to
Blue
include,
book in the
Uh,
Yeah, there's an actual Blue Book.
yeah, we have a yellow book and a green book too. But we're starting with the red book because it's the overarching one. But Brian's exactly right. There's a whole completely different sets of laws that pertain just to law enforcement. And there are a lot of things that are exempted from the Open Records Act by law enforcement for good reason,
Sure.
right? There are things that ought to be protected. But that's about protecting people, not about protecting departments. And I think that's where we've got to change our thinking in Georgia, that the purpose of the Open Records Act and Open Meetings Act isn't to protect records custodians, it's to protect the public and its right to know. So about us today, the Times is aggressive on this issue, and we will continue to be aggressive on this issue because we think it's fundamental to being free, to be honest. I mean, certainly we have a vested interest in it as the media because that's how we ply our craft. That's how we do our jobs, is accessing meetings and records. But we're hopefully doing that for the right reasons. And I know we are here. And that is because we want to be the public's eyes and ears at these meetings and be able to access information. All the reporting that we've done, all the investigative stuff that we've done, the Sunlight projects that we've done, the things that we've uncovered in our community that aren't being done in right ways, all of that is by leveraging the state's open meetings and open records laws. And I think you give great framing to this, right? If we didn't have those protections, we wouldn't be able to do that kind of work, and the public would just be out of the loop.
By the way, that's why there's a trend, I think, at least on law enforcement, that no longer letting police officers be PIOs, hiring former news media people.
Oh.
That's why the last three agencies I assessed, no, 2 out of the 3 had former news media people.
We actually have a former employee here that's a police department.
Jennifer.
You remember Jennifer?
Jennifer,
Andrew, who used to work for us?
Yeah.
She covered you some. She's, that's what she's doing now.
she's doing what?
She's like a PIO for a police department in South Carolina, I believe it is.
Sorry,
And,
okay, so-
she was on GMA just last week.
Yeah. She made the national news.
Is that right? Yeah, you're perfect.
Okay, so we pontificated a lot. Has anybody got anything you want to bring to the table? Anything you want us looking at, talking about, writing about? You know, we've not revisited that in a while.
And it's a problem, county schools as well.
What is it, what was it, Angela?
Bullying in schools.
You know, how long has it been? About a year since we did that big piece on school bullying.
Maybe a year and a half.
Yeah.
Could the bullying lead into like maybe a depression or a mental health kind of case study too? Kids who got bullied as children have more self-confidence issues or maybe something along those lines, kind of have it like branch into like a series somehow.
You know, I feel like when we did those pieces before, we put the weight of the editorial page behind it as well. We talked about the importance of the issue, but that's one of those things that just doesn't go away. So I think you're right, probably time for us to revisit.
What's the latest on the guy, because I'm out of loop on that. The latest on the accreditation for the hospital. Do you know anything about that?
Well, interestingly enough, the state came in and gave them a clean bill of health, but the Joint Commission's accreditation is still in stasis.
I
So
remember
you
reading something.
connect those dots.
I remember reading something 2-3 weeks ago that said that it was like a preliminary indication that they were getting a clean bill of health, or that they hadn't found anything,
Yeah,
but it wasn't yet final, whatever the
Right.
pronouncement. Is
Yeah.
this what you're saying?
Right, yeah, the
Yeah.
state,
The state.
said, looking good, and the Joint Commission is still saying, just look.
yeah.
Okay, okay.
And, we get really frustrated with the Joint Commission in the sense that they are not a government agency, and they are not then subject to open records legislation.
Mhm.
So we can't leverage their internal reports. And we've talked about this in this meeting before. Some of the documents that we've seen were documents that people leaked to us, but we would love to see what's in all those reports. We'd love to see those emails, but we can't get it.
I have one, which is, I've read, as most of you probably have, about how the fire retardant foam that was used by the Air Force and all military aviation for decades is cancer causing and seeped into the groundwater of hundreds of communities around the country. Have you heard about this? I fell upon it accidentally. I was reading something about my old grade school up in Pennsylvania,
Yeah.
which was a mile from a major naval air station. After the naval air station was decommissioned in the mid-90s, they did the cleanup, and then they discovered, to their horror, that the foam, and it's still being used. So with Moody being here, I'm wondering if you might want to
Yeah,
look into
we
that.
did
We
some
did a
well,
story,
you did one?
yeah, about a month ago.
Right, yeah,
Yeah,
okay,
it's been a
I
few
thought
weeks,
I'd
yeah.
read something local about it.
We're not moving an addition, is it? Even if
But
it's
so
addition.
what was the conclusion of the story that you did, that they're looking
The
at?
conclusion-
According to Moody.
Moody said that the base had been checked, the base looked good, there was no ground contamination. However, they did not inspect the waterways outside of the base
yeah.
properly. The county said that basically all of those are private wells, and that residents individually should have their water checked.
But could it not have seeped, I don't know what the past participle was, seeping, from there to the rest of our water?
Well, yeah, that's what I'm saying, that's a possibility.
If they're
I'm saying
let the private
Moody's
citizens-
Moody's inspection was just on base.
Sure,
And
I
I didn't see a problem. County's counter argument, if I do recall correctly, was that, essentially, those are mostly private wells, and it's up to the private wells owners and or the residents to have it checked.
But, I mean, respectfully, that sounds like BS to me.
Hey,
You got a ring of private wells, but then the water goes beyond that.
that's an editorial.
So I'm just, I thought it was a very
No,
interesting
no.
subject.
Yeah,
And
it
it's
is.
something and it's an invisible killer. You're drinking the water and then you're poisoning yourself, your children, your animals. I think it's a great story.
Hey, my water works
Yeah, I think
right
it's
down the
really
way from there, so I'm
Just
drinking that water.
Due
and-
diligence, due diligence, the kind of thing I'd like to have more certainty about.
Yeah, I do. I asked about the mission of Moody, and another thing too, I went to Warner Robins, and I could agree that their base is bigger. I got that, and I ain't been up there. Actually went on that base for the first time in 8 years, because that's where I did my reserve duty at. I was shocked how big that city is getting.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
You'll have some interest in what I'm getting ready to say now, but we've been working really, really hard on identifying what we think is Valdosta's peer city in the United States.
Mhm.
And we've had a really hard time. Warner Robins was very high on our list
Not
Right.
anymore.
for what exactly the kind of things you're saying. We rolled Warner, they were a finalist for us, but we rolled them off the list because the comparisons don't seem as valid as they used to.
Quite honestly, that when I was chief, I used to compare crime stats and Manning and so on with Warner Robins. but their population's just outgrown us.
Yeah,
I think they're at, my last check, was it 70?
Yeah.
70-some thousand?
right. The demographics don't really stack up. The poverty rate doesn't really stack up.
My-
You know, we heard a lot of talking around the business community, the Chamber of Commerce, about Bowling Green, Kentucky, and there are several reasons that we're not even feeling that Bowling Green matches up all of that well with us. So we're looking at a lot of different kind of communities. One of those happens to be Alexandria, Louisiana, which seems to have a lot of similarities. Then we look at the other communities in Georgia. So nobody seems to like it at all when we compare Valdosta to Thomasville. So maybe we won't go there.
Yeah, they're very, also Thomasville's proximity to Tallahassee, I think it's turning them into an exurb pretty quickly. You know, I get that feeling, it just,
Yeah, Moody concerns me, I'm not gonna lie to you.
Yeah.
And I
in
think
what
so-
sense?
Well, because they don't have they're,
That they don't have a.
It all depends on the
mission going
A10s, right?
ATNs are they gonna phase them out? That's what's there now. And, you know, Parker and Lucy are not, you know, they can't be as involved as they used to be. Obviously, Parker passed away, but and Larry kind of took that lead, and now Larry's up in Atlanta. So I don't, all I know is I went to that base and I was shocked
Yeah,
at the rural areas out in Houston County has completely exploded.
yeah,
Well, that could be the saving grace for a Moody, is that the population pressures around Warner Robins will become such that, you know, the environmental impact, the noise, the traffic.
yeah, but they're just so mission-based.
Well, there's encroachment.
You know, Moody's just tied to the A10s and, you know.
They don't have a mission. I can tell you, it's
Well, I'm
fact.
training those Afghan pilots, it looks like
The
that.
disappearing of that.
Listen, I'm gonna tell you, I saw two bases in England when I was stationed there. Two bases they put buku bucks into, and then they phased out the F-1 weapons, and they closed those bases.
Right.
If you don't have a mission, you ain't got a base. That's fact. I think anybody involved in the military will tell you that. It all boils down to that, you gotta have a mission. You don't have a mission, and I gotta tell you, 820 is not it.
Well, and these drawdowns could very much affect Moody, you know, because the A10s seem to be particularly adept at, you know, particular kinds of bombing. So, you know, there could be a direct relationship.
Booty, I mean, the booty close, you better sell your house, even in equipment. That's fact.
Well, we'll definitely be keeping our eye on Moody.
So that would be my interest.
Yeah.
Cause I'm worried about it, but, and then I just, by the way, Pam told me to pass on to you, loves your editorials.
He just makes it up as he goes along.
I marked those.
She gets to read them first, so.
I'll never feel the same sitting in a red light again.
It's all good. It's knitting.
All right, well, I've kept y'all long enough. I hope this process worked pretty well today. We're gonna do one of the meetings a month. So we'll take the first meeting every month and we will, make it available live. We'll tape it, we'll put it in the opinion section website. And, hopefully, you can direct people there if they want to know why you're on the editorial board and what we do here. So, thanks. Take a note with you.
I can't, man, I'm losing weight.
I have to.
I'm dropped 20 pounds.